Welcome, Michael Stack, to the Wellness Law Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I am thrilled to introduce you to Michael Stack. He is an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and educator by trade. Specifically, he owns Applied Fitness Solutions, which is, I guess, a fitness facility or facilities in Michigan. And he teaches at the University of Michigan in the kinesiology department. And why I wanted him to be on this show is because I spoke with him several weeks ago and learned that he is involved with people who are creating standards for the fitness industry, ethical and practice standards, because a lot of people who work in the fitness industry are not licensed. And this is pervasive in the wellness industry. It's not just fitness professionals. It's also coaches who specialize in nutrition or spirituality or mindfulness or relationships, any kind of coaching. Coaches are not licensed by the states. And so Michael and I had a conversation a few weeks ago about the pros and cons of that. And that's how we got into this discussion of creating standards. And I wanted him to share his views on the need for standards, how that's going about getting done, who's behind it, and why is that this process superior to, say, getting recognition and licensure by the state. So Michael, thank you so much for being here, and tell us about your work with the standard creation process.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And this is something I'm very passionate about talking to as many people as will listen. And you kind of alluded to it. I'm a part of a group, although not directly enmeshed in this on a day-by-day basis in the kind of creation of standards and guidelines for fitness professionals. And I'll say that Francis Nerick and ACSM, Graham Milstrand at ACE and the American Council, or excuse me, and the Physical Activity Alliance, Brian Biolgi down at University of Miami. They are very entrenched in this on a day-by-day basis. But my role has kind of been advocacy for what they're doing and providing some insight to the process. And I guess where I'll start, Barbara, is the question of why. Why do we need these standards and guidelines? And really what that boils down to is a concept called qualified healthcare provider. Ultimately, this is the path that many fitness professionals are looking to take. They believe that they are part of the healthcare continuum, but they've been on the outside looking in for so long, haven't had the advantages necessarily of insurance reimbursement, haven't had the advantages of stable income and things of that nature. So really the ultimate outcome here is to achieve qualified healthcare provider status, QHP. And that's really what this is aimed towards. And when you look at what it takes to become a QHP, there are really primarily three things that you need to make this a reality. And I'll use an example that Francis Nerick from ACSM often uses, which is nursing. And I'll parallel the nursing profession with qualified healthcare providership and fitness. First thing you need uniform standards in academic curricula across all the academic programs for a given discipline. In nursing, if you go to nursing school at University of Michigan, University of Texas, and University of Hawaii, and everywhere in between, it's the same nursing curriculum. You know what nurses are going to come out of their BSN degree with. That is not the case in kinesiology and exercise science. If you go to Michigan, Texas, and University of Hawaii, and everywhere else in between, it is a slightly to very different academic curriculum. So we need consistency in curriculum, and that's achieved through program accreditation. You have a third-party entity, and ACSM is working on this on the what I'd say is the general population end of the spectrum. NSCA, the National Strength and Conditioning Association, is working on this on the strength and conditioning end of the spectrum of accrediting academic programs. So we know that we're graduating people who have gone through a consistent curriculum and have possessed specific competencies coming out of that curriculum. Mm-hmm. So that's step one.
That's great. I just want to say that's exactly what the physicians did when they organized back in the, I think, late 1800s, early 1900s, they had noticed that training to become a physician was varied and there were no standards. And the first thing that they did when they organized was make sure that medical schools were training everyone the same, that they met certain competencies when they came out of medical school. And that's how they were able to become the first profession in the health field, really, to have that kind of standardization. And that gave them an edge, of course, when looking for licensure in their scope of practice, because they get the whole pie and everybody else gets just a piece of it. So anyway, yes, it's a good model.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, there's a path to this, and it's not just the path physicians have walked; it's the path that nurses have walked, physical therapists have walked, athletic trainers have walked. So the path exists. The fitness and the wellness space is just, a couple of decades to several decades later than all those other professions. So again, we just need to follow the path that has been laid out. And step one is, consistency in academic curriculum. Step two then is a specific, almost board-based exam after you've graduated. And there's a difference between graduating with your bachelor's degree in kinesiology and passing all those classes, and then having the specific competencies to start to work with people in the field. And in medicine, it's a board exam. Currently, right now, the way the structure will likely work with fitness professionals is an individual would be taking a certification examination. So a lot of times people will think of it as degree or certification. And what we're saying is, if we're looking to elevate the profession to becoming qualified healthcare providers, it's degree and certification, and within the specific scope that you're looking to go into. So as an example, if you're looking to work with the adult general population, it's a degree from an accredited program, and then an American College of Sport Medicine certification, such as the exercise physiologist. If you're going to work with athletes, then it's something through the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So step two is we have certification, which is analogous to the board examination that you would take if you were a nurse or a doctor. And then step three is then some type of registry of certified and degreed exercise professionals that could be referenced to ensure people are maintaining their credential with all of the appropriate continuing education. And then also that bad actors, for whatever reason they are a bad actor, are kicked off of the registry. There's actually some kind of a punitive mechanism if you fail to uphold the standards and practices and ethical guidelines in the field. So that's really the three steps. It is, uniformity in academic curriculum through accreditation. It is certification exam through the appropriate certifying body. And then it is a registry of exercise professionals that is kept up to date based upon continuing education and meeting professional and ethical standards.
So picking up on that third leg of the strategy, for traditional healthcare licensed providers, that registry is done in several places. There's the licensure. So if your license is active and up to date and doesn't have any disciplinary action against it, that you can reference that. Anybody can go online and see if your license is restricted or an active status. But then also for your boards, like for medicine, you need to keep up on your boards. And so if you don't, you may lose your board certification. So that's also a registry, and that's more on the private side of things, whereas the licensure is on the public side of things. So do you have an opinion about where this registry for fitness, and then, I would ask you to analogize again to the broader wellness community, where it should be held? Is it something that state governments need to be keeping track of, or is it a private entity, or like in healthcare, traditional healthcare, both?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And of course, I have an opinion, and it's as informative an opinion as I could have on it, but it's certainly complicated. And so I guess the way I'd start the conversation is that we already have existing infrastructure in place to some degree for this registry. There is the U.S. Registry of Exercise Professionals, U.S. Reps. If you Google U.S. Reps, it's there, it exists. All the NCCA certification. So that's not NCAA, that's NCCA. That's essentially an accrediting organization for accrediting organizations. So in the fitness industry, they accredit ACSM and ACE and NSCA and NASM. They automatically feed into that registry. So it automatically exists. It's publicly accessible. And I think that using the existing infrastructure that's in place, I think is a really important starting point for our industry, simply because one, we don't have to build it because it's already there. Two, we're feeding into it. And three, I think it is the path of least resistance on a regulatory level. I used to be a proponent of licensure until I asked myself the question, what's the ultimate outcome that we're trying to achieve here? And again, it's becoming a qualified healthcare provider. And if that's the ultimate outcome we want to achieve, licensure doesn't directly do that in and of itself. We need these other pieces in place. And I think that because of that, because it's not just licensure is the only leg of the stool, if you will, that needs to be there, I think using the existing infrastructure and kind of keeping with this trend that, and again, I'm not as really enmeshed in this world as other people are, but from what I understand, there's a kind of broad recommendation on some level to move away from licensure. I read a white paper that was written for the White House that Graham sent me, and basically said, licensure on some level is kind of constraining, opportunities in certain fields. And there may be better options. And one of the examples was with the military and portability of licenses between states. And so when I started to really think about it in terms of ultimate outcome, I think the path of least resistance and least unnecessary regulation seems to make sense. And so from that perspective, I'd use the existing private infrastructure that exists to facilitate this registry.
And that's a great point that you bring up, because a lot of people in the wellness industry and a lot of my clients of the firm, they practice nationally. They're taking advantage of all of these virtual platforms that are out there.
Yeah.
Great infrastructure from different companies have been created, kind of all in one packages for intake and record keeping and HIPAA compliant virtual meeting space, even though HIPAA doesn't always apply in wellness. And if you are going to try to obtain licensure, state licensure, as appealing as that sounds, and I've talked with people, clients of my firm who think licensure would be the ultimate goal for their profession. But the downside is then if you want to practice nationally, now you have every single state, you have to pay attention to their licensure requirements. And I've had clients in the traditional healthcare sector who've had licenses in multiple states, and they get into trouble because it's hard to keep track of.
Yeah.
It's expensive. And if something happens in one state, it's like the domino effect, and every other state then takes action based on one other state's action. And it's just a complete nightmare. And I always tell my clients, I do not recommend being licensed in multiple states if you need a license. And so the advantage that wellness and fitness has right now is not being part of that licensure system, which is very confining, very, very confining and regimented and expensive, like I said, because you have to meet all these different requirements. And I just think if you can be outside of that system, there are definite advantages to being outside of it, while still obtaining the benefit of the legitimacy that you want through this registration that you're talking about. Because there is that other side of it, which is, how do people know? How do your clients know? How do liability insurers know that you are qualified, as you say, qualified healthcare professional. I don't know if I'd use healthcare professional in the context of wellness, because I think that can invite trouble of scope of practice, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I like your idea. I'm on board with maybe if we can avoid the state licensure route. I think there are more advantages to that than there are disadvantages.
Yeah, I agree. And I just think of it practically speaking, we're talking about having to get 50 states on board if we want to make this a reality. And that seems like a much heavier lift than a pre-existing privately held registry that is openly accessible, that all the major important certifying bodies feed into. It's just, this is going to be a big enough lift as it is. So let's try to make the parts of this that are already existing be something that we use to operationalize this at the end of the day.
Yeah. Oh, and the resources that would have to go into, if you
Yes.
even did think it was a good idea to get recognition as a licensed profession in every single state. One of my earlier podcasts with Jonathan Posey, who's at the Council of Holistic Educators, they're working on a state by state level trying to address legislation that's hurting people who do nutritional counseling.
Mhm.
And it's super expensive because you have to have somebody kind of monitoring every single state legislature's
Yep.
actions and inactions, and traveling and testifying, and it takes years and years and years. And my first podcast guest, Diane Miller, she's doing that similar work from the National Health Freedom Coalition. And it's just a lot of work, and it's not going to happen all at once. All 50 states operate on different timelines and different priorities. And yeah, you're talking decades and decades of trying to get the licensure in all 50 states. Whereas if you can just go to a private organization to adopt the standards and do the registry, manage the registry, it'd be so much easier.
Without a doubt. Absolutely.
The question is, how do which organization? Like you mentioned a bunch of different ones for fitness, depending on maybe the type of population you're going to be working with. But then when you look at like health coaching, and the different types of health coaching, even there's a National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches. They kind of have that certification exam piece of it cornered. But is there a national organization that could hold such a registry? I mean, is that the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches, or is it some other organization? Can it be both? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think at least the way this is effectuated right now with the U.S. Registry for Exercise Professionals is it's essentially it's a collaboration between several of the major certifying organizations, ACE, ACSM, the NCSF, and various different stakeholders in the certification and credentialing space that come together and collaborate as a coalition. And I think that's probably how it's best done, at least on the fitness and exercise side of the industry. We're a little bit more fragmented and a little bit more diffuse, I think, than the wellness coaching space. So I don't necessarily know if there would be as much need to have a coalition, but from what I do know about the wellness coaching space, there are several different organizations out there that do offer credible credentials in wellness coaching. And unless those organizations somehow are going to wind down operations, if they are legitimate education organizations, I think they need to have a seat at the table for a privately held registry. And I think that having those different stakeholders from the different credentialing organizations, I think provides a level of check and balance and oversight that would make it as independent of a body as it possibly could be, without the risk of impropriety if it was one single organization, such as Well Coaches or ACSM. Not saying either of those organizations would do anything appropriate, but you certainly open yourself up to exposure for improprieties when it's a group unilaterally that's doing it versus a coalition.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, coalition would be ideal for that registry, and everybody's on board
Yep.
with that registry.
And that's what's happening. That's what's happening with the U.S. Registry of Exercise Professionals. And I think not enough people know that it exists at this point. And this is something I've had many conversations with people about. We just need to let everyone who's involved in this sector look under the hood a little bit to see what currently exists and what's going on. And I think as we get the message out there more and more and more, I think that people will now start to be able to wrap their head around, okay, if we want to get here, if we want to get to becoming a qualified healthcare provider, we have to be willing to do, the three things that I laid out. And part of it is this registry that's already there.
Who would be doing the accreditation of the academic programs, or who is doing that right now for kinesiology, for example?
As it stands right now, the two prominent certification organizations that exist, American College of Sport Medicine on the general population and clinical end of the spectrum, and the National Osteoarthritic Condition Association on the performance end of the spectrum, they have a program accreditation process. They also have certifications, respectively, that require you have a degree in exercise science or some kind of related degree program to sit for their exams. What they are moving towards, and I know ACSM is 2027, I want to say that NSCA is 2030. By those points in time, you actually have to graduate from a ACSM or NSCA accredited program, respectively, to sit for your ACSM or NSCA certification. So the path that we seem to be going down, and to a great extent, I think this makes sense because the ACSM and the NSCA understand the knowledge, skills, and abilities that graduates need to possess to effectively pass these exams and become productive professionals in the field. It seems like they are the logical choice for handling program accreditation, and that seems to be the path we're going down.
Okay. So the same entities that are offering the certification exams are looking or becoming the bodies that will accredit the university degree programs.
Yeah, and if you think about it on some level, that makes sense because it's the job of the American College of Sport Medicine to say if somebody passes this exercise physiologist exam, they are qualified and capable of working with these populations and doing these things. And in order for them to pass the exam, they not only have to do the specific prep work, but we also should see the depth and the breadth of an academic curriculum that allow them to really build some kind of robustness behind the studying that they do for the exam and the performance that they exhibit on the exam. So in my mind, they're kind of two sides of the same coin. I find it hard to think about how you can have a separate accrediting organization from the organization that effectively does the, in air quotes, board exam, because they know what's necessary to pass the exam and to be a productive professional in the field. Academia doesn't always entirely know what is necessary to be a productive professional in any field. They know a decent amount about it, but they're not going out there into the market and actually doing job specification analyses and things like that, like the certification organizations do. So I think that that's the role they play, is providing that feedback to the academic institution on a curricular level to make sure the curriculum actually reflects the exam, which reflects the job requirements.
That's an excellent point. And one thing I'm just going to put a plug in for all of those you listening in the wellness community. One thing that I notice as more wellness coaching, wellness management type degree programs are popping up, I would hope that wellness law would be part of that curriculum, because that is one thing that even in healthcare, some masters in healthcare administration programs don't really have a decent amount of law. In the highly regulated industry like healthcare, you would think that that would be like a necessary
Mhm.
core course, but sometimes it'll be politics and policy and not law. And I'm telling you, no healthcare administrator wants to wear stripes or orange at any time because they work in healthcare. And the same with wellness. I mean, yeah, you want to make sure you understand the legal landscape. That's a core competency. And so as more universities are looking to build these types of degree programs, because there is a demand out there, make sure you're not forgetting about the legal aspect of it, because I hate it when it's an afterthought. I absolutely hate that. That's my personal bias.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's an important point to be made here is I'm not saying, and you're not saying either, that, we think that, academic institutions don't have a degree of understanding of what their students need. What I'm saying here is that it would behoove all of us to come together with the various perspectives that we have and work collaboratively as a team to ensure that we're graduating individuals who can be impactful and productive in the field. And currently the silos that exist between academia and the professional certifications, they're broad enough at this point that that conversation isn't going on, very intensely. And you definitely hear the concerns in the academic realm that, well, we don't want an outside entity, telling us what to do, which I understand that perspective because the people that are in academic institutions are very bright. But at the same time, the goal of that academic institution is to graduate somebody who can be a productive and impactful member of the profession. And I think you need that perspective. So I don't view it as, one side telling the other what to do or vice versa. I look at it as both sides coming together for the same common goal of ensuring that we can develop our field in as professional of a way as possible.
Yes. And with the benefit of if you can do that, maybe you can avoid having to involve the states and all the regulation that comes with licensure. Yeah. So, well, this has been a very, as I suspected it would, engaging conversation. And I wanted to ask you how people can learn more about you and your work. And if they want to continue maybe asking questions or the conversation, how can they do that?
Yeah, probably the best way is to go to my podcast website. I wear a lot of hats and do a lot of different things, but my primary platform for disseminating my message into the world is my podcast, the Wellness Paradox podcast. And that website is wellnessparadoxpod.com. It's all one word, Wellness Paradox, and then pod.com. And you'll see all my episodes up there. My contact information is also up there. I'm more than happy to talk with anyone about anything related to this topic. You'll be able to see how to get a hold of me. I also would really encourage everyone to check out the U.S. Registry for Exercise Professionals. If you're certified through an NCCA organization, you don't realize it, but your name is already up there and it's sitting down there, so you can go check to see that you're up there. And again, I think it's one of those great existing resources that not enough people know about, but is in place to advance our profession.
Great advice. I'll make sure I put those references in the description to this podcast. And again, Michael, thank you so much for your time and your passion and your work in this area. I really appreciate it. And I think the broader industry does too, even if they're not completely aware of it.
Thank you so much, Barbara. It was great to be here.